I'd like to show you one of the decisive games from round 1 of the Tata Steel tournament. By the way, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, then do click on the button, free to subscribe, and click on the bell if you'd like to get instant notifications for when I post new videos. So, this game. With the white pieces, Anish Giri, well, he is potentially a world title challenger in the future. He had a fantastic 2018, and of course, last year he came equal first in the Tata Steel tournament. He's playing white against Jan Nepomniachtchi, Russian Grandmaster, very enterprising player, and we saw that on the very first move, because after Giri's e4, he played d6, the Piet's opening, so not e5 or c5, which are pretty much standard in professional chess at the top levels these days, but allowing Giri to seize the center. Well, openings go in and out of fashion, and at the moment the Piet's at elite level is not in fashion. But Giri is well known as a great theoretician, so playing a kind of curveball like this is perhaps a clever move from Nepomniachtchi. Now, the Austrian attack is perhaps the acid test of the Piet's, but Giri played also a testing move, bishop e3, which envisages quick development with queen d2 and perhaps a pawn storm on the king side like this. Very respectable continuation. a6 from Nepomniachtchi. Queen d2, b5, so he's getting his queenside counterplay going straight away, and already b4 and knight takes e4 threatened, so f3 supports that. Now Nepomniachtchi has had this position before and played bishop b7, he's played b4, he's also played bishop g7, but he thought for almost 5 minutes and played knight d7, very flexible move. And I think he caught Giri to some extent, because Giri castled queenside, committing the king straight away. It's perhaps more canny to play instead the knight to e2, or perhaps even starting straight away with a pawn storm with g4. For example, if knight e2, just remaining flexible with the king, it means if black pushes straight away, then it's possible to break up the pawns on the queen side. Obviously, an isolated pawn not too good. But committing the king makes it easier for black to target that king on the queen side and get going straight away. So knight b6, as played, suggests itself. Nevertheless, this is still, of course, a very double-edged position. And Giri starts his kingside assault. It's possible to push straight away with b4, but bishop b7. And now it seems logical to me to keep going with g5 or maybe h4, but knight h3. Knight fd7, very interesting move. So Nepomniachtchi not developing that bishop to g7, which will probably be countered by bishop h6 anyway, but instead dropping the knight back, which might be the start of one of these moves breaking in the center with c5 or e5. Bishop e2, that looks a bit weird to me, because I mean, I don't think the bishop has a particularly good role to play on e2. It's doing just as well on f1, and it seems to me that repositioning that knight to f2 or f4 would have been more appropriate. Now it's again possible to push, but a very interesting move from Nepomniachtchi, playing e6. So just controlling the d5 square, could be looking to play c5 here. And now bishop g5. Well, again, I thought repositioning that knight would be best, perhaps knight f2, and after this, well, it's still possible to play bishop h6 maybe. But Giri allowed the bishops to be exchanged, and I think that definitely benefits black here. So the knight goes back, and then queen h4. Now, a slightly surprising move, putting the queen way over on the king's side. Doesn't seem to have much to do with the pieces on this side of the board. But actually it does a pretty good job. There is, well, as we're going to see, there's pressure on white's position. So we're already the queen looking at these two pieces, for example. And it also allows the king to castle queenside. Now, you might think this looks a bit strange, but actually I think it's quite logical for the king to go in this direction, because there are lots of pieces that cover the king. So the advance of these pawns on the queen side somehow isn't so significant. It doesn't feel as weakening as it might be if the minor pieces weren't there. Now, the move I would like to play for white here is to tuck the king away here with king b1. But there is a tactical problem that suddenly white's knight is actually trapped. No retreat. That means the king is always a little bit exposed on c1. There could be an annoying check, for example. But therefore, the move I think I would like to play with white in this position is just a3. Just to rule out b4 once and for all. But instead, Giri pushed forward with f4. And this move counters that very well. So obviously pressure on this diagonal. And one of the problems is actually that this pawn is now fixed. And in many situations, it's possible for black to target that after this pawn is knocked out of the way. Perhaps that knight can come into, d5, and maybe a rook coming to f8 to look at that pawn. Giri bolstered with the bishop. Yeah, let's just look at one particular continuation. If white were to exchange here, for example, then suddenly, well, you can see pressure here on that pawn. And now this starts to look pretty dangerous, actually. And black's pieces make perfect sense here. And you can see that these pawns are potentially vulnerable. So, after f5, bishop f3 from Giri. And the pawn was pushed, attacking the knight. Now, this is awkward. Because if this knight retreats... Now, Giri did not play like this. But black is going to take here. Now you can't play queen takes because the knight is on. And after knight takes, queen takes g4. So black wins a pawn. And this pawn is isolated. Objectively, black is better here. But in this case, with the exchange of bishops and that pawn moving forward, there is potential for a counterattack on the queen side for white, with these pieces lurking, maybe this one coming out here, you never know. Black better, but that's probably the best way to go. Instead, Giri played very enterprisingly and simply sacrificed that piece on c3, breaking through in the center, but black is a piece up. So pawn takes pawn, check, king here. Now, the king is covered by that pawn on b2. But one of the drawbacks is, having knocked out that b pawn, that these squares are actually available potentially for a knight. Nepomniachtchi played knight f6, so he's a piece up. Bishops exchanged. Queen f3 check. Now, it's possible to play king a7. Maybe he was concerned about a queen coming in here. In any case, he played d5 to block the check. Now, that is a very daring move. Why? Because that knight can potentially hop into c5 or maybe e5. On the plus side, it means that the knights have potential to come into these outposts on c4 and e4. So pluses and minuses to that move. Let's see what happened. Knight d3 wants to hop in here. Very dangerous, but knight e4 covers the c5 square to some extent. Knight c5 came. Now we don't want to take straight away because that will open up, whoops, off the exchange, that will open up the d file. So the king just stepped to the side. Now if knight takes knight, looks a little bit worrying for black, but this is probably okay after rook e8. Black is well coordinated. Might be possible just to take that pawn as well. Maybe that's even better, and then you can always offer an exchange of queens with queen f5. Giri played queen a3, but now it is possible to exchange on c5. If pawn takes, then the knight will simply hop into c4. But after queen takes, a demoralized Anish Giri resigned in this position. Well, in this case, black's king is absolutely secure because it has the knight covering, and that knight, as we have seen, potentially can hop into c4. I mean, the one last chance for white is to push the pawns on the king side, but actually queen takes g4 starts the process of just dismantling this pawn chain. Well, what a shocking result in the first round. 26 moves. And Giri has resigned. He's playing with the white pieces. An absolute shocker. He rarely loses. But, you know, with hindsight, what a clever opening choice from Nepomniachtchi. This Pitts. So playing something that perhaps Giri, you know, hasn't analysed recently. I'm sure he has analysed it in the past, but you know, it's a little bit out of fashion. Very clever indeed. And yeah, Nepomniachtchi said afterwards that this was his big plan to you know, avoid lots of theory. So, great start. Another decisive game in the first round. Vishy Anand won against his young Dutch opponent, Jordan van Forest. Carlsen drew with Ding. Now, that was a very exciting game. I might try and record that one. I'll see how much time I have. Let's have a look. Okay, well, anyway, this is a great tournament. I'm going to be posting videos every day, and yeah, do check out the vids. And of course, if you're not a subscriber, as I said, click on the subscribe button and you'll get a notification every day of new posts. Thanks for watching.